A lot of people say, well, this might not be the sexiest election because you do a lot of row offices and school boards and all that. But these are the most important elections because they are the ones where people most directly affect you, probably in terms of your pocketbook and in terms of being a local, a local taxing source and that kind of thing, right?
You are absolutely right. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is the level of government that has a really pretty direct impact on most Pennsylvanians day in and day out, from our schools to our municipalities. I agree. These are very important elections.
What have you learned from elections over the years? I first got to know you when you were a representative, and you were driving down here and being on just you and me, and we were on a TV show together here in New York, and you were just kind of out there. What do you remember about elections? What kind of hits you along the way now that you've become a senator in the ultimate run here?
Oh, I don't know. I suppose there's a lot of things. One of the things is I've been reminded, don't be too sure you can predict the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And when, it may be a lot of people think it's obvious, it often is not obvious. The voters get the final say. So lots of twists and turns along campaigns. Surprises almost always happen. And the outcome is never really certain until it's over.
Things tug at you all the time. I'm sure you have pressures on you all the time, people who want you to hear their voice all the time. How, what over the years, what have you developed as kind of your governing rudder in terms of being an elected official? And, with all these things that can come at you, especially on a national level now, too, how do you sort through all the noise in the room?
Well, it's important to have some core beliefs and some core principles. For me, I'm a huge believer that freedom is the highest political goal to which we can aspire, that the freedom of every individual Pennsylvanian and American is really what the Founding Fathers were trying to ensure when they devised a form of government in which the government would serve the people and not the other way around. And so for me, I ask the question when we're looking at legislation, does this enhance the well-being of the people I represent? Does it expand and preserve freedom? Or is it an attempt by, big government types to take more control over people's lives? Not everything falls along that dichotomy,
sure.
But quite a lot of things do. And, I try to come down on the side of freedom.
One of the things that I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, liberty and freedom to me are perfect concepts, which talks about the brilliance, I think, of our Founding Fathers. And when they went out and they looked at the perfect concepts and they said, now we are going to try to form a more perfect union. And I know there's a lot of different interpretations of that, but one of the interpretations I think you could make is that, when man puts his hands on liberty and freedom, we generally screw it up. We generally manipulate it. And a lot of us are sitting back right now watching people manipulate our liberty and freedom. And one of those is the vote. And, I had three things down this morning. I said, do you worry more about inside government sources in Congress, the intelligence community, maybe even the deep state that a lot of people are talking about, changing the results of election? Do you worry more about outside governments like Russia interfering or states keeping voters from voting for any reason? And so far, people have said, hey, I'm worried more about our Congress, our intelligence community, our deep state, changing the results of an election, which we've watched for the last 3 years here with the attack on Donald Trump. What's your take on this whole thing right now? And obviously, we have to talk about the impeachment inquiry as well.
Well, first of all, I think we're not finished yet in getting to the bottom of how it was that the FBI decided to spy on an American presidential campaign, and that is extremely disturbing. I think Attorney General Barr is doing a thorough investigation on that, and I think we'll learn a lot by the time he's finished. One thing it's important to remember, it's very, very hard, given the dispersed way that we run elections, the fact that every state is responsible for running its own elections, that then the various counties have their own systems within every given state. It's very, very hard for anybody, whether it's inside the country or outside the country, to actually manipulate and change the vote outcome. So parties both inside and outside the government can try to be disruptive forces, can spread dishonest messages. The Russians certainly have done that to try to undermine Americans' faith in democracy, for instance. But one thing one really good policy we have is we've never nationalized our election. We've never created a single federal process and mechanism. If we did, it would inevitably be vulnerable to the innumerable attempts to get in and break through the system. So by having dispersed this, by having decentralized it, by following the Constitution's requirement that the states run their own elections, we've actually ensured ourselves a degree of security that we wouldn't otherwise have. And I think that's important to preserve.
Obviously, you're in the House that would try the president if impeachment charges were indeed filed, and it looks like that may well happen. We'll wait and see. But as you look at the other House operating right now, what things are you pleased about? What things are you not pleased about in terms of this impeachment inquiry that's going on?
Honestly, I haven't found a lot to like about this, Gary. I mean, first of all, it's been a very opaque process. It's still an opaque process. I mean, they finally had a vote on whether or not to proceed down this road, but they didn't. In that vote, they didn't require that they were going to open this up so that the American people can see this evidence that they consider very important and decide for themselves. Is this, do we have impeachable offenses here? Has the president committed high crimes and misdemeanors for which he should be removed from office for the first time in the history of the republic? This is a very, very bold and really important and drastic thing that the House has undertaken. Unfortunately, they've done it behind closed doors, in secret. And then, of course, they leak out selectively the testimony that they think helps their argument. Now, it's hard to find a lot to like about this, Gary.
When I was reading an article yesterday by Frank Mealy called "What Was President Trump's True Crime?" And I'm going to ask you that question. When you look at 3 years of what has been political savagery, listen, the president can dish it out, too. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say he doesn't fight back and he'll go down in the gutter and fight as well. But what was his true crime? From your standpoint, one of the things that Frank Mealy points out was he said he made us laugh at Congress sometimes. But, is he the ugly American we don't want to be? Is that he got 63 million people to vote for him? What's his true crime from your standpoint?
Well, so that's the problem, right? I haven't seen the crime yet. I mean, there's plenty of things that I have disagreed with the president on.
Sure.
Policy issues where I've publicly said, no, I disagree with the president here. There's others where I've strongly agreed with him. I think the tax reform, I think the regulatory relief, the confirmation of judges that respect the Constitution, all been very terrific and very important. The president says a lot of things that I wouldn't say, tweets a lot of things I would rather he didn't tweet. And in the conversation on the phone with the president of Ukraine, there's things I wouldn't have said. But where's the crime is the right question, and I haven't found it yet. So that's the question.
From a historical standpoint, and I used to be a history teacher for a long time, as you know, I sit here and I watch this, and I think to myself, are we intruding upon the separation of powers? Are we getting to a point where a president cannot talk to someone without thinking that there's going to be a congressional investigation out there? I mean, each branch has certain separate powers that they're allowed to use. Obviously, we don't want our branches abusing those, and yet at the same time, we want to have some freedom to be able to talk, and especially when you have one person, the head of the executive branch, doing that. Your final thoughts on that?
So first of all, there is a natural tension between the ability of the executive, the president, and his administration to be able to converse among themselves and with others with privacy, and the ability to be able to keep a secret and have a confidential conversation.
Right.
There's a natural tension between that and Congress's responsibility for oversight. And there's always been a give and take on this from the beginning of the Republic, goes back to George Washington, and that's a natural thing. What's not natural and what's not healthy is when one party decides it's going to overturn an election because they can't live with the results of the election.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that's a big part of what's going on in the House.
I agree with you. Senator, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, Gary.